Crispatus may be one of the most impressive things a woman can do for restoration of skin appearance and
Oh,
health.
wow. We don't have to do Botox. We just need the right bug. We need
Well,
Crispatus.
yes, once again, all the things that are done in conventional healthcare are proving to be unnecessary and destructive. So if we were to swab a young woman's skin, let's say a 25-year-old, she's got crispatus. As a woman ages to age 65 or 70, they all lose crispatus for a variety of reasons, including exposure to antibiotics and topical product, etc. Well, if you restore crispatus, if we believe the early evidence, if a woman restores crispatus to the skin, there's an explosion in dermal collagen. That is the level of skin health that prevents wrinkles and gives you youthful appearance.
Your health is shaped by more than symptoms. Through real stories and expert insights, we explore how your genetics, environment, and daily choices affect your well-being. We uncover root causes and share practical tools to help you find the healing you need. Welcome to the Forum Health Integrative Medicine Podcast.
Well, welcome everyone to our podcast today. I am super excited to have Dr. Davis, William Davis, as our guest today. He has written many, many books, and the book that we're going to talk about today is Super Gut. Now, it was published, I want to say 4 years ago. Fantastic. If you haven't read it, you should. But after this podcast, we'll at least give you the Cliff's Notes of some of the important highlights, and then you'll be inclined to go read it. So welcome. Welcome, Dr. Davis.
Well, thank you, Dr. Peterson. Glad to be here.
I want to start by, sort of talking about this from the perspective of a doctor. Most of us are taught in medical school that the gut is, primarily to digest food. Maybe we eliminate some waste. But you argue the gut's actually central to immunity, metabolism, mood, chronic disease. Mood, I think, is the one that catches most people off guard. What led you to that conclusion?
Well, I was conducting my program for many thousands of people that starts with elimination of wheat and grains, this thing that has been changed dramatically by agribusiness, and it's no longer this thing that grows traditionally, as well as addressing some common nutrient deficiencies that all address this epidemic of insulin resistance and inflammation, which essentially involves the entire population, certainly two-thirds of the population. That is, insulin resistance that leads to dementia, cancer, heart disease, and virtually all the common diseases of modern people. Vitamin D, magnesium, iodine, omega-3 fatty acids. It sounds random, but they're all nutrients that are deficient in modern life because of the habits we engage in. Well, we do that, and you see dramatic improvements. People lose, say, 50 pounds of weight off their abdomen, their blood pressure drops, their inflammatory measures drop, risk for coronary disease, all those measures improve. People experience dramatic improvements in health, but not all the way. And that's what was frustrating. I said, well, why? So let's say somebody is a type 2 diabetic and their hemoglobin A1C is 11.7%, which is terrible,
Right.
and
Yeah.
they're on their way to amputations, kidney failure, dialysis, etc. They do the basics in these programs: wheat and grain elimination, those nutrients, and their hemoglobin A1C drops, say, to 6.7%, much improved,
Right.
still awful,
Yeah.
still in the range of type 2 diabetes. They say, well, why? Why am I stuck? Why am I at this plateau? So it was clear that there was something missing. And so I asked, well, what could be missing? And became clear that it was the microbiome, addressing the microbiome. And as my work unfolded, it became clear, and the science has become very clear, that the microbiome in modern Americans has been completely disrupted due to a number of factors. Overexposure to antibiotics. You may know that the CDC tells us that 650,000 prescriptions are written every day for antibiotics. Every day. Most of us by age 40 have taken 30 courses of antibiotics. In other words, we're widely overexposed to antibiotics, sometimes necessary, often not. And
Most of
other
the time,
factors.
probably not. And it's crazy because as a physician, there's this experience that if you don't prescribe antibiotics, the patients are unhappy because they anticipate that that's what they need. And since they know what they need, if you don't give it to them, you must not care about them, right? And at the same
Right, or the
time,
bar.
yeah,
Exactly, yes.
and that the way that the insurance system works right now is, you got to see these people and get to the next one. And so you can't have a lengthy discussion about how this is doing them harm.
Mhm. So the system supports this kind of misuse of antibiotics, and there's all these other things. Our exposure to glyphosate, that's in virtually everything now: air, water, food, pesticides, herbicides, chlorinated drinking water, and all the things we're all exposed to as modern people
My
have
favorite, and I'm
disrupted.
just gonna interject this real quick, Dr. Davis. My favorite thing, the thing that I learned, and I was, because yeah, I've read books like this for quite some time, and I had not understood emulsifiers and the
Mm.
damage that they cause. So thank you for that. That part of your book was really insightful to me, because people can be gluten-free, they can be grain-free, and yet they're still eating a peanut butter with an emulsifier because they're trying to eat more fat and protein, right? So that was a big, it was a nugget for me.
Yeah, the science has progressed to tell us that such seemingly benign things as emulsifying agents or preservatives, they're meant to inhibit mold growth in food, but also inhibit microbial growth in your GI tract. So many things that we just took for granted are disruptors of the gastrointestinal microbiome. But the net effect is so a lot of these factors, emulsifying agents, preservatives, antibiotics, other pharmaceuticals, kill off beneficial microbes in our GI tracts are much more susceptible to these factors than are pathogens. So, of course, if a woman has a urinary tract infection, it's usually E. coli or Klebsiella or Salmonella or many of the related microbes, and the antibiotics and all those other factors are effective in killing off the beneficial microbes that were suppressing those potential pathogens. And so there's been this effect where we release the growth of pathogens in the colon. But what shocked me many years ago was that when you allow these pathogens to proliferate in the colon, they then ascend into the small intestine. This has been talked about for years by the alternative health community, but it proved to be true. It took a 2007 study from Belgium, Dr. Patrice Kenny, who finally validated it formally. That is, microbes in the small intestine enter the blood, their breakdown products, specifically lipopolysaccharide endotoxin, enter the bloodstream. But it now tells us how microbes living in the GI tract can exert their effect, can export their effect to the brain, to the skin, to the joints, to the heart, to the bladder, to the uterus. In other words, to all parts of the body, that the GI tract is not just confined to the GI tract. It is a process that affects the entire body. You might experience it as dementia or depression or suicidal thoughts or as psoriasis or seborrhea or as atrial fibrillation or coronary plaque rupture, heart attack, sudden cardiac death, or as repeated failure to have a full pregnancy, or as endometriosis. In other words, we've got to reconsider everything we thought we knew about human health in light of the contribution of the microbes in the GI tract.
At Forum Health, we uncover the why behind your symptoms. With advanced lab testing, hormone optimization, and cutting-edge therapies, we help you heal and perform your best. And now, through shopforumhealth.com, you can access physician-grade supplements trusted by our providers, supporting everything from adrenal health to focus and longevity. Learn more at forumhealth.com and explore supplements at shopforumhealth.com.
So you said something there that I think is worth sort of teasing through. The lipopolysaccharide or other toxins that are released when these bacteria are in the wrong place and as they die, that's causing a lot of those symptoms. A lot of the inflammation that's exported to these places outside of the GI tract is because of these toxins, right? What what part of it do you think is because of the immune changes, the immune dysfunction that happens. And I would look at those two separately. One is inflammation from a direct toxin, and one is inflammation from a change in the immune response. What have you seen with respect to that?
Sadly, most of that evidence is animals and not in humans. So, for instance, there's a series of studies from MIT where they looked at exactly that. What is the effect of distortions of the microbiome on the immune system? It's become clear that the microbiome, for instance, is responsible for thymic involution, that is, for the atrophy of the thymus gland. Thymus gland, of course, in the chest, in front of the heart, the seat of T cell immunity, that is the process that protects us from bacterial infections, viral infections, and cancer. And of course, what's surprising is that this science tells us that our maximum thymic volume and T cell producing capacity was reached at age 15. And then as we
Seems a little
age
early.
to age 65 or 70, we have about 10% of our original thymic volume and T cell capacity, which explains why, for instance, as you know, someone dies of pneumococcal pneumonia or the flu at age 70, but not at age 18.
Right. Now, at age 18, they may not even go to the doctor. They may not even need an antibiotic. It's remarkable.
Right. So a lot of that is the process of aging, of course, genetically programmed aging. But a lot of it, a surprising amount of it, is programmed by the microbial composition of your gastrointestinal tract. This thing that we have dismissed as meaningless. I mean, it's amazing to me that for decades we thought the gastrointestinal microbiome was responsible for nothing more than diarrhea after a course of antibiotics.
Yeah.
And that,
Yeah.
oh, it'll come, you'll recover. Well, yeah, you do, but you don't recover all the microbes you've lost.
So I have a
And
theory about that. My theory is because we've often talked about how the appendix is unnecessary. And I think there are probably other physicians that agree with this, and I don't know that we have evidence to support this, but I don't think the appendix is totally worthless. That's where you're storing all the microbes should you get dysentery. How will you get them back otherwise? I think it's sort of like the library at Alexandria, and if it gets burned down, you don't have a repository of all that information. But if you got dysentery and you had a functioning appendix, then your body could recolonize the colon. So that's my thought on.
great, great analogy, by the way. Yeah. So the appendix, of course, is at the interface between the ileum and the ascending colon, and it's positioned, as you point out, perfectly for restoration of a microbiome that's been destroyed. Of course, this all occurred before the age of antibiotics. It occurred for other reasons too. But the bottom line here is modern people have destroyed the microbiome composition of their gastrointestinal tracts, colon, and then secondarily small bowel. But it's the small bowel I focus on because it's a small bowel that by design is permeable. That's where we're supposed to, of course, absorb nutrients, minerals, vitamins, amino acids, fatty acids, etc. Well, the presence of fecal microbes that have ascended from the colon into the 24 feet of small intestine increased its permeability and thereby the access of this endotoxin, lipopolysaccharide endotoxin, into the bloodstream. And we know, this is not my science. There's a more than abundant science in the several years since Patrice Kenny validated this from Belgium. We now know that this process, this increased presence of fecal microbes in the small intestine, thereby endotoxemia in the bloodstream. We know with good evidence now, it's the factor that drives weight gain, type 2 diabetes, cognitive impairment that leads to dementia, Parkinson's disease, Lou Gehrig's disease, psoriasis, eczema, atrial fibrillation, coronary plaque rupture, myocardial infarction, sudden cardiac death. In other words, all the things we thought we knew. You know, giving people Lipitor reduced cardiac, what? No, 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 no. Giving people a diuretic for blood pressure?
Right.
No. An SSRI for depression? This now looks like we're practicing medicine from 2,000 years ago in light of the wisdom provided by the science unfolding about the contribution of endotoxemia.
One of the things that you said in the book that I really loved, because I had seen other literature on this, was the connection between SIFO and Parkinson's and brain issues, dementia, because of how the brain is a place where apparently fungal elements will go. And like you say in the book, must be through the blood. That's the only way it could get there. And so it had to go from the gut to the blood to the brain. And then we end up with dementia. That's a big deal, right? So let's talk about that a little bit. I think people have heard about dysbiosis for some time, but SIBO and SIFO, I think in the integrative world, patients have heard about this, and probably largely thanks to you and other physicians like you. But my colleagues that are still practicing conventional medicine sort of roll their eyes a little bit. Tell us the difference, if there is one, between dysbiosis, SIBO, and SIFO.
It's a very disturbing and largely unsettled question. That is the role of fungal proliferation in the human body. We sadly, people with type 2 diabetes kind of serve as a proving ground for a lot of these concepts because they're so much more susceptible to so many diseases. They die younger, they have coronary disease, amputation, peripheral vascular disease sooner than other people, and they all have, I shouldn't say all, but nearly all have SIBO and SIFO, small intestinal fungal overgrowth, colonic and small intestinal fungal overgrowth. The series of studies that brought this to my attention was a series of studies from Spain, from Dr. Ruth Alonso's laboratory, where she did something remarkable. She took the brains of people who died of various causes, car accidents, cancer, heart disease, etc., and then looked at their brains for the presence of fungal organisms. And lo and behold, people who die young, let's say in a car accident at age 27, they have no fungi in their brain. People who are older, say 78, they have some fungi in the brain. People who die of dementia have brains filled with fungi. Now, that can't prove cause and effect. Is it the cause of dementia? Is it a contributor to dementia, or is it just a curiosity? So that's not been established. But think about this for a second. If your listeners think about what happens to type 2 diabetics, and you know this, type 2 diabetics often have fungal infections of their groins, under the breasts, of their necks, of their forehead, behind the ears, and they have multifocal fungal infections. And they also have more fungi in their colons. And when we do a stool test, of course, it's a rectal test. It's not a small intestinal test, but they often have overgrowth of fungi. And the limited evidence tells us they also have fungal overgrowth in the small intestine. So does the GI tract, the gastrointestinal system, act as a repository for fungal? I've always believed that there are things that are operating against you and me to accelerate aging. And once you have children, you no longer serve much of a purpose to society, sad to say.
That's right. Yeah. As far as biology is concerned, you did your job.
Right. So vitamin D deficiency, great example. If you're lacking in vitamin D, which is virtually the entire population, unless you address it specifically, you're going to have insulin resistance, coronary disease, cancer, type 2 diabetes. In other words, vitamin D deficiency, lack of vitamin D, is maybe nature's way of hastening our demise, our getting rid of us. I think fungal infections are the same. If a tree falls in the forest, how does nature reclaim it? Fungi, mold. So is fungal infestation in humans part of the process, and nature saying, hey, you played your role in life, and now it's time to leave? So I wonder if it's part of the process of aging. That sounds very pessimistic, but it also means if we appreciate that insight, maybe battling fungal infestation is part of the process of maintaining health and maintaining youthfulness. And by the way, that's one of the things we're seeing now as we do all these crazy things in managing the microbiome, whether it's fungal infestation or bacterial overgrowth, all these things, is the maintenance of youth. There's a really cool study. Now, I give a lot of credit to the people at MIT, a cancer group who were looking at specifically this one bacterial species, Lactobacillus reuteri, and they were looking at it for cancer effects because this was a cancer research group. And there's cell culture and animal data tell us that Lactobacillus reuteri, this one microbe that nearly all modern humans have lost, by the way, and all mammals have, including hunter-gatherer humans, unexposed to antibiotics, they all have reuteri. So they were exploring this question of whether Lactobacillus reuteri is an anti-cancer factor, especially in colon cancer. So they're exploring this question, and they're giving mice this microbe, Lactobacillus reuteri, and seeing some very interesting effects. Acceleration of healing, cutting healing time about in half. Growth of hair, of fur, dramatic increase in growth of fur. They did something unusual. They took groups of mice and fed them a garbage diet meant to mimic fast food, hydrogenated fat, sugar, polyunsaturated, all those things. And the mice who just got the diet got fat, lost their hair, lost interest in life, lost interest in mating. They got fat and died. The mice who got the same garbage diet, but along with Lactobacillus reuteri in their water, stayed slender, grew fur, mated, played, stayed young until they died. They stayed young until they died. And so that got this ball rolling for me that, well, is that important for humans? So one of the things I've been doing, it's one microbe. There's many other microbes, of course, but it's one microbe we can restore. Now, the issue back a decade ago was that this microbe was available commercially, but it was available as tablets for infants. And so infant dosing, of course, is much lower than adult dosing. Well, how do you increase? Well, you could take hundreds of tablets a day, which is silly, right?
It's expensive at least.
And expensive. So I just used just basic reasoning. Well, what if we ferment this microbe? Microbes don't have sex, of course. There's no male and female microbes. They just double themselves. So we're going to ferment it as something that looks and smells like yogurt. It's not yogurt, that is in dairy. So a human source microbe, we're going to reproduce in dairy. And I did this. And by the way, the people who knew something about this microbe, including the company who produced it, said, you can't do that. No one's ever done that. Well, I did it.
Right, yeah.
But it took 36 hours of fermentation. You know, when you buy yogurt in the store, that's something made with traditionally sourced microbes that are not sourced from humans. Lactobacillus bulgaricus, Streptococcus thermophilus, these are microbes traditionally used to make yogurt. They're not microbes from the human body. So what this led to was using microbes sourced from humans, in this case, Lactobacillus reuteri, to ferment dairy into something that looks and smells like yogurt, but of course it's not yogurt. You can't buy it in the store. But all the evidence, all the observations made in mice, shockingly, lots of studies where something is shown in mice often don't prove true in humans. In this case, to my great surprise, nearly all, not all, but nearly all the observations made in mice have been proving true in humans who make this yogurt. Fermented 36 hours. I did flow cytometry on this yogurt, and we get about 300 billion with a B, microbes per half cup or 120 milliliters serving. So in other words, all this is a way to take a microbe that we've all lost as humans because of its susceptibility to common antibiotics, restoring it in high counts, and all the things that were seen in mice, well, I shouldn't say all, but nearly all the effects seen in mice are proving true. That is acceleration of healing, amplification of the immune response. We've not done a study, by the way, to look at, for instance, thymic volume. It have to involve MRI and T cell subset. We haven't done that, but we do see people who seem to coast through life without viral infections, without other infections, and have smoother skin and restoration of youthful muscle and increase. We did a small experiment in 20 men over age 55, and we saw a 50% rise in testosterone, specific loss of abdominal visceral fat, the most problematic form of fat. In other words, nearly all the observations made in mice we're seeing proved true in humans. And that's just one microbe, of course.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's awesome. I'm going to make a few comments here. Let me start with this, and this is somewhat heretical. In medicine, we feel really obliged to wait until the evidence is in. It's one of the, I think, few places that we do that. Most of the decisions we make in life, we don't wait for evidence. We make a statistical analysis without thinking about it. It's called thin slicing, and we make a decision, right? I don't need evidence that driving around with my doors open in my car is dangerous compared to doors closed, right? And yet in medicine, we're like, well, we don't have proof for this yet, so we're not going to. And it's almost like we're doing ourselves this disservice because we want to wait until the altar of science has been sacrificed to. And I'm not saying we shouldn't do the science. We absolutely need to, but we need to act when the evidence points to something. And then we need to keep doing research to prove. And if we acted early and the proof was different, then we can shift our direction rather than say, well, I'm just going to keep eating poorly and ignoring this because the evidence isn't conclusive yet. Right. So that's my first observation. The other one is that this Lactobacillus rhodori, essentially because it is from humans and from our GI tract, it sounds like what you designed was a more palatable fecal transplant. Because instead of it being all the fecal transplant, it's just the microbe that we really lacked and said, hey, why don't we culture it and then we'll eat it from above instead of take it from below and it'll do the job. But, and then the last thing I would say is my patients have this idea, and I think it's entirely misguided, and you actually address this in your book, which I appreciated, that they'll take a probiotic for a while and then their GI tract will be restored. All those bugs will grow there. And I've always contended with them that no, most of those microbes are actually tourists. It's sort of like New York City. At any given day in New York City, probably 10% of the people there are tourists, but they have an important function for New York City. If all the tourists were to stop coming, it would totally change the nature of the city, right? And so we need the tourists, and it's not going to be the same people every day, but it's the same kind of people. It's people from outside of New York, and they just have to keep coming. And I think probiotics are that way. And historically, we ate bacteria so frequently that it's unclear to me. I'm not sure that we'll ever have evidence one way or the other because now we're talking about history, but it's unclear to me, were some of these bacteria living inside of us or were they constantly visiting because of the food that we ate? Does that concept make sense? What are your thoughts on
No,
that?
I think the best confirmation of that idea, which is very insightful, by the way, it comes from the Sonnenbergs from Stanford,
Oh, yeah,
Erica.
Joel. And I can't remember his
Yeah.
wife's name. In fact, they had a great part in their book about fungi and how they help communication. So anyway, read their book if you haven't read that one, audience. Go ahead. I'm sorry to interrupt.
So they published a very important study, maybe about 4 years ago now, where they showed that people who ingested lots of fermented foods, kimchi, kefir, yogurts, fermented veggies, and these are species, interestingly, as you would point out, have microbes in them, but microbes that don't colonize the human GI tract. These are species like Leuconostoc mesenteroides and Pediococcus psittolacticide, Pediococcus pentasaceus, and others. There are microbes that you ingest, let's say as fermented red onions or kefir, and they pass through your GI tract and you poop them out. So what good are they if they're just, as you say, just visitors to the GI tract? Well, something happens. It's not quite clear exactly how. They somehow open the door for the restoration, repopulation of the GI tract with microbes that are beneficial. Akkermansia, Fecalibacterium, Lactospiraceae, Rumidicacea, Lactobacillus, Bifidobacterium. In other words, this, you've heard this before. Your listeners have heard it. If you have a pile of rags in your garage, it doesn't form rats, as used to be thought many years. So
That's right,
can't create new species. So how in the world can these transient microbes from fermented foods cause the proliferation, restoration of beneficial? It's not quite clear. Are they quiescent in the mucus barrier, for instance, sequestering the mucus barrier? Does it make us more amenable, more accepting of microbes from doorknobs and other people and other things? It's not entirely clear, but it is clear that the consumption of microbes that do not colonize the GI tract somehow foster the restoration of beneficial microbes. So, meaning,
And
we
in a
interpret
way,
that.
that really shouldn't be all that surprising. There are things that we make ourselves. For example, vitamin D. We make that, right? So we know we need it. But we do not make vitamin C or B, and we also know we need it. So some things we have to get from outside of ourselves, and they are necessary on an ongoing, everyday basis. And other things we do produce, and they are necessary. And so the idea that there are microbes that we don't make, but they are necessary for our life and existence and health shouldn't really seem all that surprising. It's not the only instance of that in biology.
Also what another thing you point out that this need for B vitamins like folic acid, people say, in pregnant women, so they don't have spina bifida and other midline diseases in their child. All these, or how about high homocysteine from lack of B6, B12, folate?
Or from lack of the right bacteria that make them.
Yes. So we know exactly right. We know that bacteria, when properly restored, when you have the full array of microbes that you need, produce naturally B1, B2, B3, B5, B6, B7, B9, B12. In other words, they produce these things for us. So all the things we thought, oh, you need folate for proper pregnancy, you need B6 and B12 for reducing homocysteine, not have depression, suicide, and heart disease and cancer. No, these were all inadvertent attempts to correct what the microbiome, what our damaged microbiome was not doing for us. But of course, the real response, of course, is to restore the microbiome to the situation that we had a century ago.
Oh, this is great. Well, my favorite chapter in your book was chapter 5 about mucus. And I think it's, in my opinion, arguably the most important, because I think it's at the intersection of these microbes and our immune system and the penetrability of this layer that is supposed to absorb things. And we need it to absorb things or we'll die because we won't get fuel. But we only need it to absorb the things that are good for us and keep out the things that are bad for us. So why did you make that its own chapter? Why did you think it deserved enough attention to say there's got to be a chapter on mucus?
Because as you point out, we dismissed its importance for a long, long time. For instance, somebody eats some ice cream, some strawberry cheesecake ice cream or rocky, whatever, and it's got polysorbate 80, it's got carboxymethylcellulose, it's got carrageenan, it's got diamonoglycerides, it's got all these factors not because the food manufacturers are evil, sometimes they are, but in this case, they did it because you let that ice cream thaw and then refreeze it, and it turns into a block of ice and solids, and it's inedible. And so they add these huge quantities of emulsifying agents to inhibit that separation of water and solids. Well, that separation also operates in the human gastrointestinal tract, whether it's ice cream or salad dressings or many other foods, where they add emulsifying agents that make the food more palatable, but disrupt the integrity of the mucus barrier. And the mucus, of course, is that little millimeter thick lining in your GI tract that protects you from microbes. Some microbes are beneficial, of course, but many microbes are not. And you don't want those microbes like E. coli, Klebsiella, Citrobacter, many others, to contact your intestinal lining, because when they do, they're very destructive. And they, of course, release their toxic byproducts into the bloodstream. So loss of the mucus barrier, destruction of the mucus barrier, such as occurs when you have a cup of ice cream or some salad dressing. I mean, things we thought were okay, increases the entry of bacterial byproducts against the intestinal wall and then into the bloodstream. And then we have all the consequences that result: abdominal fat, weight gain, increased blood glucose, increased risk for heart disease, dementia, Parkinson's disease, skin diseases, sleep apnea, and on and on. All the things that are familiar to us.
Every disease.
Yes. So I think
unless it's a broken bone, it's every disease comes from this inflammation.
right. Unless it's dengue fever or a fractured femur.
Well, and I almost hesitate with that, because with dengue, I would argue that if our microbiome is healthy and our thymus is doing its job, we can resist some of these infections that we can't without that. And so, yes, infectious disease killed us more than inflammatory disease 200 years ago, no question. And so the argument that we should go back 200 years is misguided, because I don't want to die of tooth decay at age 40, right? And so there were problems with the way we were living without being able to understand our ecosystem, and hey, these bugs are eating us. The discovery of microbiology was a huge leap forward, but then we hurt our microbiome, and that was a huge leap halfway back. And so but it seems like even infectious disease would be less of a problem with a healthy microbiome, because we would be well colonized with things that protect us, and there would not be real estate, if you will, for the inflammatory microbes to move in and cause a problem. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Humans have always been subject to injury, as you point out, as well as infection. All we have to do is, of course, look at the Yanomami in the Bolivian or the Brazilian rainforest, or the people in Malawi in Eastern Africa, or the Maasai or Hadza, or the people in the highlands of New Guinea. They, of course, do have some infections, different than the infections we get. But as you point out, their immune systems are different for a variety of reasons, but part of which is the maintenance of their microbiome. And the interesting thing about those populations, of course, is these are populations that are separated by thousands of miles of ocean, who don't talk to each other, they don't text each other, they don't contact each other. Yet they have gastrointestinal microbiome, and by the way, microbiomes in other locations of the body too. So we talk a lot about the microbiome of the
The
gastrointestinal
gut,
tract, but
yeah,
there's
but
a microbiome of the
what about the
skin.
sinuses or the vagina?
Yes,
Right.
yes. All the part, the brain, the airways, the vagina, the prostate, the skin, all have unique microbiomes. Well, those populations separated by thousands of miles of ocean have microbiomes, mostly gastrointestinal has been studied, that are nearly identical to each other, which
Wow.
begs the question, well, why would that be? Is that essentially the Stone Age or the Paleolithic microbiome that we should have had? So the question becomes, obviously, should we work to restore that kind of microbiome? How much is their microbiome an adaptation to their style of living? How much is necessary for human life? It's an unsettled question, but it opens the door to asking questions like, should we have more Prevotella? Should we have spirochetes that they have in abundance that we don't have any of except for syphilis?
No, and we do our best to kill off H. pylori as much as we can, instead of say, "Oh, wait, maybe this has a purpose." I don't know what it is. I'm just theorizing that I'm at least being open-minded that there might be one. I don't know, but it's a spirochete we've
Yeah.
lived with.
Right, yeah. So, as you point out, there's a lot we know, there's a lot we don't know, like H. pylori, like the role of Lactobacillus crispatus in the vaginal microbiome and prostate health, by the way,
Yeah.
the
Oh,
role
yeah.
of
Well, and I
fungi.
love that you say the microbiome of the brain or the microbiome of the prostate. I think most people would be very remiss to say that, because you're fighting against the dogma of we are aseptic everywhere outside of the gut and the skin, which is simply not the case. It's absurd to think that bacteria haven't figured out how to wiggle their way through and then float around in the blood. Of course they have, right? It's just not as good a place to live. I like the example with my patients. I'm like, look, microbes like to live where the food's at. And the food is in your gut, and the food is on your skin, and the food is in your mouth and around your teeth. There's not a lot of food for them to eat in other places. And it's just like people. If you look at people, they live where the food's at, which means they live within 30 miles of the ocean, or at least 30 miles of a waterway. There's not that many people in central Nevada. Why? Well, because there's not a lot of food there, right? And so you can sort of see where microbes live based on where they can obtain nutrients. But that doesn't mean there's no microbes in these other places. So we're not aseptic. And every time I visit with an infectious disease doctor, and like, no, there's no bugs there. You're like, really? No bugs there? That's like telling me there's no people that live in Wyoming. I know there's not many, but it's not zero.
You are in the 0.01% of physicians who appreciate that fact, which is very rare. So I'm in suburban Chicago, and about 20 miles from my house, there's a group at Loyola in Chicago that have done extraordinary work, very elegant work to show, for instance, that the urinary bladder, we, as you point out, we thought it was sterile. We thought no microbes should live in the bladder because it caused urinary tract infections, which is all kinds of problems for ladies mostly. Oh, the bladder has a unique microbiome, and
Well,
it's
and
meant
how
to be
could it
dominated.
possibly be sterile? We're talking about a 1-inch urethra. How would microbes not be able to climb their way up there? Of course they can. It's ridiculous.
So the microbe that this group showed is very dominant, in the vagina and the urine and bladder is Lactobacillus crispatus. What is even more shocking, a woman who loses this microbe, 'cause like Reuteri, it's very susceptible to common antibiotics. So a woman loses Lactobacillus crispatus, and she's thereby much more prone to Candida vaginitis, bacterial vaginitis, urinary tract infections, and shockingly, incontinence. A
Mm,
woman sneezes or coughs and wets
right,
herself. Very embarrassing.
right.
And you know that the conventional solutions for incontinence are awful. They're
Oh, yeah,
terrible.
yeah.
They
If you
often
wanna
don't
fall
work.
down and fracture your wrist, take one of those medicines.
Yeah, right. They're just awful, and they often don't work. And so now it's become clear that not all, but many cases of incontinence are due to a disruption of the urinary microbiome. This thing we thought was sterile for years. And by the way, the very preliminary science is suggesting that Lactobacillus crispatus, that plays a very big role in female reproductive organs, genital urinary organs, may also play a big role in male health also. So if you and I were to biopsy, say, the prostate glands of men with prostatitis, benign prostatic hypertrophy, BPH, or prostate cancer, none of them have this microbe Lactobacillus crispatus.
Wow.
If we biopsy the prostate glands of guys with healthy prostate glands, they all have crispatus. Now, that doesn't prove cause and effect, but it's kind of looking that way. That is, the loss of crispatus may be one of the factors that leads to prostate disease. And by the way, ladies, I deal a lot with females. Most of my audience is female, oddly.
They're the only
And
ones that listen. You know that.
this is true. Crispatus may be one of the most impressive things a woman can do for restoration of skin appearance and
Oh,
health.
wow.
So if we were to
No more Botox,
swab.
go with Crispatus.
Hmm?
I said we don't have to do Botox, we just need the right bug. We need
Well,
Crispatus.
yes, once again, all the things that are done in conventional healthcare are proving to be unnecessary and destructive. So if we were to swab a young woman's skin, let's say a 25-year-old, she's got crispatus. As a woman ages to age 65 or 70, they all lose crispatus for a variety of reasons, including exposure to antibiotics and topical product, etc. Well, if you restore crispatus, if we believe the early evidence, if a woman restores crispatus to the skin, there's an explosion in dermal collagen. That is the level of skin health that prevents wrinkles and gives you youthful appearance. So that's preliminary data. What I don't know is if a woman takes crispatus orally, which will, by the way, populate the GI tract, of course, but also the vagina and urinary bladder, which, as you point out, there's no connection. There's contiguous nearness in the perineum, the groin, but there's no direct connection. The vagina is not connected to the bladder. It's not connected to the gastrointestinal tract, but there's nearness. Well, does that also apply to the skin? I don't know. No one knows. No one's done those studies. But if a woman applies crispatus to the skin, if we believe the evidence, there's an explosion in dermal collagen. So one of the things I did was I wanted to help ladies restore crispatus to the skin, but you can't just apply a microbe as a powder, say, a freeze-dried powder. So I tried to develop a delivery vehicle, an oil or some other thing, an emollient, a cream, whatever. But everything kills crispatus. That's a crazy. I tried jojoba oil, almond oil, omega-3, everything you try, everything kills crispatus. So I've been telling ladies, make crispatus it's not yogurt, but looks and smells like yogurt. By the way, it's delicious. It's the tastiest yogurt that you can make. Reuteri is very sour, very tart. Crispatus tastes like whipped cream. It's
Wow.
very delicious. Yeah. And a woman can apply it. A guy could too, of course, but guys typically don't care. But a woman can apply it and obtain the skin effects of crispatus. Maybe obtaining it
And
orally will do the same, but I just don't know that for a fact.
sure. And, did you mention a way for them to repopulate the bladder with Crispatus? Because it seems like that could be a vaginal, suppository as well, and I know that would seem strange, but there are women that use yogurt vaginally to try and recolonize that, and this would actually be the right thing to do it with.
I'm very grateful that the Loyola people showed that a woman can take crispatus and other microbes orally to repopulate the gastrointestinal tract, and it will
And it will go to the bladder.
somehow
Okay,
Yes,
fantastic.
populate both vagina and bladder.
Awesome.
How? I mean, we presume it's via, as we said, contiguity, nearness in the perineum and the groin area.
Well, and I'll
Is
give
there
you an
some other method?
example.
Don't know.
Yeah, I'll give you an example. I suspect you've seen something like this. I see patients and I know they have GI yeast because they have all the symptoms. And they also have, like you say, yeast, redness, itching under their armpits, under their breasts, and their groin. And when you give them nystatin only goes where you put it. It's not absorbed. And the nystatin will kill their GI yeast, and yet their armpit will clear up, their breast will clear up, their groin will clear up. Now, not as quickly maybe as some of the bloating will clear up, but it'll clear up. And it's my argument that yes, it's not because the nystatin's being absorbed and killing it in their armpits. It's because now the population is going down where the population is greatest in the gut. And since the population is going down there, now their immune system can probably take care of some of the other. But I think there must be something going on that's got something to do with nearness more so than absorption. So
You raise a very troublesome question, and that is if somebody has those issues with fungal infestation in multiple body sites, and if we believe Ruth Alonso's numerous observations that people with dementia have fungal infestation of their brains, should we give those people, let's say, who have fungal infections, candida infections, say, of their armpits and groin or whatever, should we treat them with a systemically absorbed
sure, like
antifungal agent?
itraconazole or Diflucan.
Yes,
Yeah,
to prevent dementia.
right.
Tough question, right? Because there's no way short of brain biopsy to prove that somebody has fungal infestation of the brain. It would require something like this. Somebody who, let's say, we think has fungal infestation of multiple body sites and thereby presumptively of the brain, and then give them, say, some antifungal like fluconazole that penetrates the blood-brain barrier. And then we do, let's say, cognitive testing over the next 5 years. And we show that the elimination of fungi improves cognition. No one's done that. It'd be a really interesting study to do,
Would
by
be.
the way,
It would be
right?
phenomenal. And I would love to see the results of that study on Parkinson's as well, because of the connection between Parkinson's
Yes.
and this. That would be fantastic. So,
Yes, yes. As you're pointing out, which is so incredible, that it's causing us to reconsider all we thought we knew. That Parkinson's disease is we treat it with L-Dopa and
exactly.
other things that increase dopamine. Well,
That's how
that
we treat
doesn't.
everything. We're like, "Oh, here's the one thing we know, let's give it," right? We
Right.
insist on all the proof before we do anything. If we did that in
Mhm,
the rest of our lives would be a disaster. Well,
mhm.
we gotta wrap up. This has been so much fun to talk to you. Let me finish with this question. You spent a great deal of time discussing fermented foods, specific probiotic organisms in your book. Uh, which microbes would you just say, and maybe give three that you would say, hey, pay attention to these. If you can figure out how to use these would be the things that the typical person who has fatigue or brain fog or achy joints or the classic symptoms of SIBO, what would you tell them to do?
Dr. Peterson, so having played with multiple microbial species over the years, I've come to appreciate that most probiotics, commercial probiotics, are haphazardly concocted. They're just random collections of microbes with no thought to collaborative effects among the different microbes,
Probably
nor
whatever
on
is cheapest
physiologic
to grow.
effects. So, ironically, the microbe I chose to play with at first, Lactobacillus rhodori, is probably among the most important microbes that's harbored by all mammals, hunter-gatherer humans, and lost in modern humans. And that's a microbe, by the way, that colonized the small intestine as well as colon and is known to produce bacteriocins, natural antibiotics, such as this thing called Reuterin. It's a very potent antibiotic. But microbial produced antibiotics are smarter than human produced antibiotics because they're specific for unhealthy microbes. Modern antibiotics are not so smart. They kill lots of things, good beneficial microbes and bad microbes. So the bacteriocins of beneficial microbes like Rhodori are effective in killing the pathogens, the unhealthy species. Another one is probably Lactobacillus gasseri, which, by the way, plays a big role in female health also and body composition, where fat is located, where muscle is located. So Lactobacillus gasseri also important. Another one would be Bifidobacterium longum, also very important. And what happens is you restore these microbes and all kinds of fantastic things happen. Irritable bowel syndrome symptoms regress. Inflammatory diseases regress. Sleep is deeper. Dreams are different, by the way. You have childlike dreams. You're going to be flying and having
I missed
monsters
that. I'm taking this. I missed those dreams.
and showing up in English class in your underpants.
Well, I don't miss that dream.
All that stuff that we had as kids comes back. Skin appearance changes. In other words, this is not about regular bowel movements. Yeah, that's part of it. But there's so much more here. I think it's a complete reordering of what healthcare means. And what I love about this is it puts the control of health, appearance, physiology, etc., into the hands of everyday people. It does not require a hospital to do this.
Yeah, I love that. I think that's a fantastic way for us to finish, that we really do have the control of our health in our own hands, because it's the foods we're putting into our mouth. It's the bacteria that we coexist with. It's the way we treat other people and how grateful we are, because how that affects the autonomic nervous system. And if we need a hospital, it's usually because we ignored those things for too long, rather than paid attention to the thing that has kept humans healthy for eons. So,
Well said, Dr. Peterson.
well, I appreciate you spending an hour with me. It's been a tremendous pleasure. Thank you so much. And
Thank
to
you.
our listeners, we'll see you next week.
Thank you for joining us on the Forum Health Integrative Medicine podcast. Each episode, we help you understand your health from every angle and inspire your lifelong wellness journey. Follow the show, share it with someone who needs hope, leave a review, and take the next step toward feeling your best at forumhealth.com.